You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Filmmaking Conversations with Damian Swaby. Listen to conversations with award-winning filmmakers, directors from the golden age of television, and creatives from the indie film community who continue to inspire the next generation of filmmakers. And now, over to your host, Damian Swaby.
Alexis, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. So happy that you're able to do the podcast with me. I really appreciate it. After watching your work and understanding more about you from visiting your website, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on Filmmaking Conversations.
Thanks so much for having me.
Alexis, from what I've seen, you've had a diverse journey from studying at Brown University and the New School to creating acclaimed documentaries. Can you share what initially drew you to the art and power of documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, it was a bit of a meandering journey, I guess. I was studying biology and science in university. And then I always wanted to be in the arts. So after graduation, I was acting for a while, and then I became a little bit, I wasn't getting much work, and I was disenchanted with the idea that you had to wait around for people to kind of give you work. And at the same time, was really interested in documentary and real people and telling their stories. So I started making some of my own stuff, and then I went back to grad school, to the New School. In making documentary films, you can sort of explore all of these different things that you're interested in, really. So I always think whatever meandering path you take to get there works.
I mean, that sounds great. Very similar to myself as a former actor, the whole waiting around and hoping your agent calls and offers you a great audition coming up, a great casting, but you know, it might not be a great casting. You might not get anything at all. So inside me, I was like, I have to do something. I can't live like this. And of course, I needed money as well.
Yes,
so
there's always that. We do live in a capitalist society.
Yeah, there's definitely that element. But what do you think makes you yourself be the type of person who just can't sit around, like, other than the things I've said regarding acting and then becoming a documentary filmmaker?
Well, a lot of what you said, for sure. And creatively also, I just wasn't feeling very fulfilled. And I wanted to make things. And I love talking to people and hearing their stories. And it seemed like a good combination to me. So I tried it out, and I really liked it.
What was the first documentary you made, and what was that process like for you?
The first thing that I made that I think I was proud of, let's say, because I did a bunch of like little things leading up to that, was probably my grad school thesis film, which was about a father and son pigeon racing team. It's called Coney Islands for the Birds. That was a really fun story, but it was about community and how you can form a community around something so seemingly random to other people, and have it bring so much meaning to your life. And I really loved getting to explore that.
Your recent work, Fire Through Dry Grass, presents a harrowing yet inspiring look inside a nursing home during the COVID-19 pandemic. How did you manage to tell such a personal and impactful story amidst the challenges of the pandemic? And what message do you hope audience will take away from it?
So that film was also a bit of a meandering journey that I think like projects sort of evolve that way in documentary filmmaking. Sometimes you meet someone and it leads to something that leads to something. So the film takes place on Roosevelt Island, which, have you been to New York?
Yes,
I don't know if you've been to New York. It's in the East River. It's a tiny little island. I don't know. Some people live in New York and they have never heard of it. But I grew up there, and I love Roosevelt Island. I talk about it to anyone who will listen to me.
Okay.
So a former professor of mine, actually from grad school, had moved to Roosevelt Island, and she met this group of guys who were residents at the long-term care center on Roosevelt Island nursing home, and one of them was teaching himself filmmaking. And so she was giving him some advice on projects, and then he got a grant to work with a professional filmmaker. And she knew I was from there, and she thought that we would hit it off. So she introduced us, and he had me over and interviewed me for the job, and we hit it off. And so he hired me. So I was mentoring him in filmmaking. His name is Andres J. Molina. And I would go there, and he wanted to make a film about the group that he was a part of. And the guys who called themselves the reality poets, they were writing poetry about their lives and going around and talking to people, talking to kids and other people about gun violence and choosing gun violence prevention. Mostly it centered around that at that time. And so I was helping him on that project for many months and some other things. And then the pandemic hit, and everyone got locked inside the nursing home. Things were looking really grim. I was super worried about him. One of his fellow reality poets passed away, actually.
Sorry to hear that.
And yeah, we were really worried. And then at some point, early on in the pandemic, the nursing home moved a patient into a shared room divided by curtains who had COVID, and he had come from a hot spot in the city that everyone was like talking about. And Jay was trying to get the administration to move the patient because he has underlying conditions, and they weren't separating patients essentially. And he called the woman, also a Roosevelt Island resident who had started the group that he was a part of. And she said, "Jay, you're a filmmaker. Maybe we should make a film about this, about what's going on," because nobody knew what they were going through. It was so confusing to get information for everyone, and for them in particular. And they invited me to then Jay called me, and he invited me to co-direct this with him. So at first we thought we were making, this is a very long answer to your story,
No, great
to your
answer,
question. Yeah. Sorry. So Jay called me, and I said yes right away because I was super worried about him, and we thought we were making a short film, really to get out there, so people would know what was going on inside of the nursing home. And then as we were working on it, things weren't getting better. The pandemic kept going on. At some point, even well into that first year of COVID, after they got vaccines, they were still confined inside. And then it was really an epidemic of loneliness, and things were just continuing. So we kept filming together. I would film from the outside through the gates, or film the reality poets through the windows, and the rest of the city going about returning to normal life. And Jay and his friends inside the facility were filming inside with GoPros and phones. And then we were recording all of their Zoom calls. And they really started a movement while they were locked inside for over a year.
Wow.
So to get back to the specific question of how we actually made the film, it was really difficult, but all of us were, like, I'm sure yourself, like, we were all living on lockdown, so we're doing everything remotely anyway. So we worked with our editors remotely. We found this wonderful animator to work with remotely. And we use a lot of cloud storage.
I could imagine a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. So when you make a documentary like that, what do you learn from it personally?
Oh, I learned so many things from making this film. And from the reality poets themselves. It was a very collaborative project. So Jay and I moving into a co-directorship, co-filmmaker relationship from mentor to mentee had its own things to learn, like how to sort of shift that power dynamic of someone being your teacher into being your collaborator. And for me to really try to still be a mentor, but also listen to what he wants and wanted, and what his aesthetic preferences were, and try to figure out how we could merge both of our ideas about things was really challenging, and I learned a lot. And then I learned a lot from the other reality poets too. When I was saying that it was a very collaborative project, all of the guys in the group were involved in the film. One of the main participants in the film is also our co-producer. Another one was very involved in the music. He did a couple of songs, and our composer used some of his beats also. Nice. And then another one helped with some of the graphics. The end graphics, Carter, is his design. And then he also, along with another reality poet who had moved out of the nursing care facility, worked with our animator to create the poster design and some of the key art. And everyone was giving feedback on all of the cuts, which was a really wonderful way of working. Very sometimes difficult at times, because you're not used to showing so many, or at least I wasn't, so many cuts along the way, and being open to feedback, because it's really messy. And for people who don't know how to make a film, or for people who don't have experience making a film, it might be confronting. Like, I know one of the participants in particular was really like not into the animation that we were doing at first. And I kept being like, it's not going to look like that when it's finished. It's not going to look, you know what I mean? It'll come along, but stuff like that. But it was also really great because we were making a film that was authentic with all of our voices in it, or as authentic as one can make something that you're ultimately crafting, but something that felt true to what was going on. I think the challenge of that during the pandemic was really that you're making a film while you're still going through the trauma of it all. So how to like not re-traumatize all of the participants as they're watching this stuff that just is almost happening in real time was difficult. We ended up getting mental health counselors, to sort of work with everyone while we were going through the process.
And can you name one challenge in particular you had being mentor to collaborating with the mentee?
Maybe it was the dance around trying to find our a shared aesthetic for the style of the film, because we really have different things that we like. He likes big blockbuster type things. I'm not opposed to a big blockbuster film myself, but it's not the kind of stuff that I'm interested in making. So that was difficult, because sometimes also Jay, there's a reason he lives inside of the nursing home. He needs medical support. So sometimes he'd be really tired or not feeling well. So he'd be like, oh, that's fine, just because he was tired, instead of really digging into what he wanted. So it was up to me then to sort of then maybe be like, oh, maybe we'll wait a couple of days and come back to this and revisit it again, because I think that he might actually not be fine with it. So trying to navigate that was probably the biggest challenge.
And are you happy with how the film has been received? Are you
happy?
Happy? Oh, great.
Yeah, I am. And I think we all are. We feel like, the whole group, it was, as I said, a big collaborative project. I think we're all very, very happy with how it came out, and feel like, I always feel like, okay, if I went back, would I redo this a little bit differently and that a little bit differently? Sure. I'm always going to feel like that. But I think we feel like we really achieved something. And now the group, the reality poets, and the group they're part of called Open Doors, are really taking the film and running with it and using it for the activism that they're doing that was really born while we were making the film.
And moving into the world of adolescence with your documentary, Dear 13, How did you approach capturing the universal yet unique experience of coming of age across different cultures? And I must say, I really, really enjoyed watching Ethan.
Oh, did you? Oh, good. Yeah.
Uh, we'll get into that, but
Okay.
sorry, I interrupted you before you got a chance to answer. Go
Oh,
ahead.
no, that's okay. I'm so glad. Thank you for letting me know. He's terrific. He really
Yeah.
is. For that film, I started off really small, knowing that I just didn't have a lot of money up front. So I knew that it was going to be the kind of thing that I was sort of making in fits and starts, which actually worked for this film because I worked with, I have a longtime collaborator, Trina Rodriguez, that I work with, that I've worked with for years. We went to grad school together, actually.
Oh,
And she was my editor and the other producer on Dear 13. So we would talk about, every few months when I would film some more 13-year-olds, we talk about what else we wanted, where else I should go, where else I could look, what other issues we wanted to talk about. And how did I go about it? I think I started off with a Google search and I found Ethan. He was like the first one. And then also with some young people that I knew. I knew Landon already. And I knew Awa. She was one of my students. Who is, I don't know if you've seen the full film, probably you
oh
only
yeah.
saw Ethan, but
I've
yeah.
seen the whole film. Yeah.
Okay. So I started with, I think I must have started with Awa because I knew her already and we had a relationship. Um, and we had a lot in common because I also grew up in the city and was like applying to high schools like she was at her age, and like the pressure of all of that I could really relate to. Um, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question? How I got
It
started?
certainly does.
Yeah.
One of the things while watching it, I thought to myself, what was the inspiration behind making this film? And it looked to me that it may have taken quite a long time just because of the nature of having to find and speak to so many 13-year-olds. And what were their parents thinking when you said, hey, I'm a filmmaker, can I document
Yeah.
your child? How did that all work out?
So it started because I was teaching documentary filmmaking to this age group for many years. And as I'm sure you know, there are like thousands of amazing documentary films, but there aren't that many that are actually told through the voice of young people themselves. So my students would watch documentaries and we talk about them or whatever, but I always felt like, oh, wouldn't it be great if there were more things that they could directly relate to someone their own age with? Um, and so when I had a lull in this other project that I was making, Neighborhood Slice, I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And I really wanted to make a film that I felt could be useful and that I hadn't seen before. I'm not saying that it's like you've never seen a film like You're 13. You've seen many, but for me, like from that point of view, really is what I wanted. And I wanted it to feel cinematic, and like artistic or whatever that means to me, I guess, because I also think that there are a lot of things that are made for young people that are made in a certain way that plays to what older people think young people want.
Oh, okay.
If
That's
that
true.
makes sense. Yeah. And I wanted something that was positive, that
Yeah.
showed different things that young people were going through that they could then use to facilitate conversations afterwards. And then as I was making the film, I realized this was my favorite year of my life. Well, I mean, there have been others, but it was a very, I would say, big year for me. And, a lot of things happened in that year. I think I would also see this in my students, like they would start out one way. And then by the time they were leaving at the end of the year, really transformed, in terms of what they were interested in and thinking and even
Mhm.
how they looked, often.
So do you mean, sorry, just to make it clear to me and maybe the audience, do you mean 13, the age of 13 was a big year for you, or the big year for you was making the documentary?
13 was a big year
Okay.
for me.
And why was that a big year for you?
It was the last year that I was in school with all of my best friends, and I feel when I look back on that time, it was really special. And I think it was a year for me also when I started to think about what I wanted to be like as I stepped into adulthood. And also, as you see in the beginning of the film, it's the year that I lost my diary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a
Sorry.
big deal.
And the parents, how did they react when you said you wanted to make this documentary?
Sort of different ways. There are some folks who didn't want to be a part of it, but all of the ones, I've never really worked with anyone who I've had to convince to be
Oh,
a part of a project. It's
good on
not,
you.
thanks. It's not really something I'm interested in doing. I think it's a real partnership when you are filming someone and they are being filmed. And I think anyone should want to do it,
Hmm.
and everyone has their own reasons for doing things. So I think what a lot of these parents had in common was that they listened to their kids.
Yeah.
And if the kids wanted to do it, then they had family conversations and thought about it and obviously talked to me. And I think it helped. I'm sure it helped that I was a teacher at the time, I was teaching, for many years. So I had experience with young people also. Yeah, and then it was just, a lot of conversations. For Ethan, his family was so nice. I know they were really deliberating and they were like, "Okay, well, why don't you come out and we'll meet you?" And, I love them now. I mean, I
Yeah.
still hang out with
Right.
them sometimes.
And Ethan, I was just found it remarkable. When I was 13, I was, watching Transformers, eating ricicles, messing around.
What's a
Like,
ricicle?
oh, rice. You have them in America, but it's basically Rice Krispies. You know Rice Krispies, right? The
Yeah,
cereal.
yeah. Uh-huh.
But it has like these kind of marshmallows in
Yes,
them.
we call it a Rice Krispie treat.
Oh, yeah. So it's
Yeah,
basically
okay. So
um
what are they called again?
ricicles.
Ricicles. Okay.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, they're made by Kellogg's as well. So yeah, I was be messing around and things like that, and playing Nintendo. So seeing this kid on screen, literally wanting to be a politician. Well, he is a politician, I guess. And I've noticed the Glenn Beck book as well. And I thought at 13, I wouldn't be able to comprehend the idea of reading the Glenn Beck book. So tell us a bit more about him, because I'm intrigued how he became so political in the first place.
His family's not political at all, so it just
Wow.
really came from him. In fact, I don't know. Did you watch the short? I think you watched the short, right? Or
Both.
maybe. Okay,
Which,
so you learn in the short that his dad had never voted before, actually, before he went and voted for his son. So
gosh.
it came from him. I think when he was interested in it from a very young age. I don't know how, but he remembers when he was 5, he had, I think it was like a Lincoln birthday party where like he was dressed up like Lincoln and they had that was the theme kind of thing. Yeah, so I can't say like, because he couldn't pinpoint really like what it was, but I think he found his thing, and he's now studying. He's in college. He's in university in DC, in Washington DC. So we'll see where that goes.
And do you
Yeah,
think a character like him or any of the other characters you'll revisit in the future and maybe see where they are when they finish college? Or
Julius is lobbying me to make a new film about them all. I told him if he can get me funding, I'm all for it. Yes, I would like to, but I think for me, this film is more like a time capsule kind of film. Like there was a reason I didn't want to like put an ending on it where you see where they are now, because I felt like I wanted to keep it contained into this 1 year and keep that feeling
yeah,
that you have, or the feeling that I was hoping to create of this age, with all of the ups and downs, and finding the universal themes within all of these far-flung people. So I don't know if I'd make necessarily a follow-up with all of them, but yes, I would love to see what's going on. I mean, I am still interested in these benchmark, or what I think are benchmark ages. in order to get into grad school. I think I made a film about turning 30.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, it was terrible, but
Okay.
um, I don't know. I think there's something about like having a specific time in your life to just take stock of what's going on. That I think is interesting.
And I agree with you. I certainly do. You have loads of interesting films and topics and ideas, which I love, obviously. So
What are your benchmark ages?
oh gosh, that's a tough one. For me, there's definitely, I think becoming an adult at 18 in the UK is very a big thing. I think 25 is a benchmark because you're in a situation where you're young, but you're not kind of young. And, it's 30 is there for you to see. And I think 30 is probably a time when just my opinion, you really, really have to get certain things together, or you could really, really, really pay for it. Whereas maybe in your 20s, you can still eat ricicles and play Nintendo for a bit.
You don't have any bicycles there on the desk?
No, not today.
No.
I'm too old now. But those are my kind of benchmarks. And from what I've seen with family and certainly with some friends who maybe don't address the benchmarks, they may suffer for it in certain ways. We can't be young forever, unfortunately.
No.
And in your fabulous documentary, Neighborhood Slice, you showcase the resilience of New Yorkers in the face of gentrification. What has documenting these community narratives taught you about the spirit of the city? And how do you choose the stories you want to tell?
That's a good question. So I made this show with my longtime collaborator who I was talking about before, Trina Rodriguez. And we were both interested in capturing a kind of New York that we felt was disappearing. All of the mom and pop shops and the folks that have lived places for a long time that were getting pushed out, and we'd see it happening, a lot. And it just continues, as big box stores come in. And, here, I don't know what it's like in London, but we have a lot of empty storefronts in
Yes,
New
we're getting
York.
back here now.
Do
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the homeless.
Yeah. I don't know. There's something kind of similar to me in the idea of capturing 13, like this time capsule of 13, as to like capturing these almost pioneers in their neighborhoods of New York, who have managed to keep the spirit and the culture of their whatever their thing is alive in the midst of all of this change. And so how do we choose the people? It depends on the neighborhood, and it depends on the neighborhood sort of has each neighborhood in New York sort of has its own journey, and they can be really distinct. And there's always something similar, like a wave of gentrification pushes this, pushes, and it starts with like maybe people looking for a better life who are moving over from a certain place in the 20s, 30s, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then there's like a wave of artists, and then the artists get pushed out for this reason, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But each one has a different flavor. So it really depends on the neighborhood. And we try to talk to local people who can tell us who the real people are that have made a difference, so that we're not just telling stories about kind of famous people. It's more stories about the real people who have lived there.
So when you make a documentary like that, they feel quite personal and intimate in certain ways, and you have to be real yourself with the people you're dealing with. Do you have a large crew? Do you?
No. I never have a large crew. I mean, one day I'd like to test it out, but for Neighborhood Slice, Trina and I would do everything ourselves. So I think that's where the intimacy comes in, and like sound, and then we both be shooting. And then we did have some other editors that we worked with, and then Trina's an amazing editor too. She edited Dear 13, and Ethan
Oh, are we
Sorry.
talking about lav mics, or did you have a
Yeah,
boom?
lavs.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. So
otherwise it would be hard to like be, well, we will
yeah,
always have like a little shotgun mic on the camera, and then we use lavs and stuff, but we don't use lights or anything for interviews for that show. And I think considering how two-woman band we are, it looks
yeah,
pretty good.
yeah. It does.
Um,
It does.
yeah, thanks. But I mean, I think that there's a trade-off in intimacy when you're working on something, and you can get, especially when it's like folks who aren't maybe used to getting filmed so much, and you want to share this experience with them where you're really listening to their life story and they're feeling open and safe enough to tell you all of the ups and downs and things about it's helpful to be small and nimble.
Is there a particular piece of feedback they gave you, or a moment from the audience that watched the series that has resonated with you deeply?
That show in particular, because it's on local public television here, we've gotten so many amazing notes from people about that. That I've never really had that experience before, but people just really love the show and resonate with it. I think there's something there's something that we all feel in seeing the mom and pop places
Yeah,
go away. Um, and I think people really appreciate having the local history captured. And getting to know the residents in other neighborhoods, and getting to know other neighborhoods, because there are so many and they're all so
mm,
different in New York. Yeah, so for this particular, I mean, just I can't think of one specific comment, but it's like an
yeah,
overwhelming like thing that we feel like we did something good by
sure.
capturing it. Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier about teaching, and beyond filmmaking, obviously you've dedicated time to developing programs and teaching students throughout New York. How does your work as an educator and mentor influence your filmmaking?
I haven't been doing much teaching lately, but I was working with Jay before, mentoring Jay before, who was my co-director on Fire Through Dry Grass. And Awa was my student who was in Dear 13, and I think it's hard to separate different things that you're doing in your life, at least for me.
Yeah,
I think in the work that I was doing, where I was teaching Awa and younger people her age, I really just came to love that year of life and reflect on my own year of life when I was 13. And it totally inspired that film. I think my teaching there. Um, and the work that we're doing on it now, like now both films just recently came out, so now I'm working on the impact campaigns for both of them. So oftentimes, like after you make a documentary film, if there's some sort of social issue or like educational something that you want to do with it, you raise money and you have an impact campaign, and it's basically to use the film as a tool for social change or education or advocacy, whatever, what have you, depending on the project, um, to get it out there in the world for all of those different things. So for Fire Through Dry Grass, we actually have quite a robust impact campaign going on with dedicated impact producers, and it's going to be taken over by Open Doors and the Reality Poets soon, so that they can take the film and use it as they want in their work. Um, and for Dear 13, the reason that I wanted to make this film in the first place was really to use it as an educational tool. So now what we're doing is developing an educational guide with all sorts of activities and stuff that are inspired by the film, so that we can share it with youth programs and schools and stuff, and they can pick and choose what they want to do with it in conjunction with watching the film.
excellent. That sounds very, very interesting that you're able to do that. I haven't spoke to many filmmakers on this podcast that have been able to do that. And I'm approaching episode 200. So well
Wow, cool.
done. And you have had your projects backed by institutions like Sundance, Ford Foundation, and ITVS, which is something that is no small feat. Can you offer insight into the process of securing support and partnership for your films, and how crucial these collaborations have been in bringing your documentaries to life?
It's really hard. Actually, all three of those are for Fire Through Dry Grass, and we had a really it was a very interesting film to work on, in that as the film was developing, people were very interested in it. I think they were interested in the story, and they were also interested in the filmmaking team, as a story that was really told from the inside out, which is something that funders are interested in seeing more of now, I think. So we felt like it kind of magically happened that we were getting interest. And then, once you get one thing, then people hear about you, and it's easier to get more. And I think particularly in raising money for films, it's always hard to get those first few grants, because it's so daunting to reach $1 million or whatever, like little on, whatever your budget is. It's so daunting, and maybe people don't want to give money if they think that their money is just not, if you don't have a plan to raise the rest of it. But I think people were so kind of moved and inspired by the reality poets and what they were going through and the movement that they were building, that we got a lot of support. And I shouldn't just say it's that. We also had a lot of amazing support from the community and great other folks on our team. Like our other producer her name is Jenny Lee Brewster. She's a really terrific writer. And I think that that's something that people don't talk about a lot in terms of raising money, is sort of how to distill the message of your film down, and all of the voices of the different folks on your team into one cohesive voice that speaks to people who will give you money and who will open those doors. And that was very important for us, I think, in being able to have a cohesive voice.
Yeah,
that wasn't just a cohesive voice in the film, like that I was worried about, you know what I mean, finding that I was talking about before, but that was also like written on the page for people to see and respond to that way. And so this was the first time that I've ever worked on a team like this and gotten a lot of those big backings. Dear 13, we did end up getting like some good backing at the end of the film, but it was almost after we had put the film together. And I think it was because it was a hard project for me to talk to and explain at first. And it was in the making of the film that it really...
Understandable. And what can we see from you next?
What can we see next? Well, Trina and I are working on some more Neighborhood Slice episodes. So okay, more of those. And then I'm percolating some other ideas.
Great. Well, I hope I'll be the first to know those other ideas, and I hope they come through and we can watch those as well. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I hope to speak to you soon.
You too. Thank you so much. It was great to meet you.